Hello, everybody. I am Captain Jim Palmer, the Dream Business Coach. I'm the founder of the Dream Business Mastermind and Coaching Program, creator of Dream Business Academy, founder of No Hassle Newsletters and Dream Business Radio. Now in its 10th year, this is episode 514, I believe. So welcome to another live edition of Dream Business Radio right here on Facebook. Coming to you again from my new home office. I suppose I could say that maybe 1 or 2 more weeks and then it won't be new anymore. But my special guest today is Doug Noll. And Doug, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jim. How are you?
I'm doing real good. Doug and I have actually spoken before, so we're just catching up there in the green room. But before we get rolling, this episode of Dream Business Radio is brought to you by the Dream Business Mastermind and Coaching Program. If you're an entrepreneur, small business owner, tired of slow to no growth in your business, or if you really want to figure out how to do multiple streams of revenue in your business, something I'm really good at, then check out dreambizcoaching.com, dreambizcoaching.com. All right, let me tell you a little bit about Doug Noll, and I'll tell you why I'm excited to interview him. He speaks about and teaches people how to solve difficult, intractable, and highly emotional problems. He was a business and commercial trial lawyer for 22 years before turning to leadership development, problem solving, and peacemaking. Doug is a senior consultant with Mobius Executive Leadership and maintains a high-level mediation and arbitration practice. For his innovative work, Doug has been voted one of the best lawyers in America since 2005 by U.S. News and World Report and has been recognized since 2006 as a Northern California super lawyer. Super lawyer. Might be a cape involved there somewhere, Doug. I'll have to ask you about that. He's also the author of a book, which I have kind of sped read for when we previously talked. It's called De-Escalate, How to Calm an Angry Person in 90 Seconds or Less, which is what I titled this interview because I think it's a great name. He's also the author of Elusive Peace, How Modern Diplomatic Strategies Could Better Resolve World Conflicts. Now, if that's not enough, he's also an adjunct faculty member of Pepperdine School of Law Institute for Dispute Resolution, and he also teaches the psychology of conflict communication and decision-making in conflict. And one more time, if that's not enough, he's a ski instructor, a third-degree black belt. He's a Tai Chi master, whitewater rafter, fly fisherman, jazz violinist, and folk fiddler, and he flies airplanes and helicopters in his spare time. Doug, that's got to be the longest intro that I've ever read, but man, I couldn't leave anything out. It's so fascinating.
I've had a fun life.
Oh, my goodness. You know, what's interesting, and just so you know, I interviewed Doug, I think about a couple of weeks ago for my regular podcast, and I said, this is just such good stuff. I would love to get you in front of my Facebook Live audience that shows up. And then, you know, most people catch it on the replay, but you've had quite a life. So before we dive into everything, Doug, my listeners, in addition to enjoying strategies and tactics and things like that, they love the backstories. And as I said, I've just read quite an impressive and interesting and time-filled background. Share a little bit more. And don't go back to, you know, I was born in a little house in Kansas City, but from lawyer, 22 years, how did that all happen?
Well, I went to college, went to Dartmouth, came back to California. In those days, if you didn't go to med school, you went to law school. So that's what I did.
Yeah.
And graduated from law school, did pretty well in law school academically, did not want to go back to the LA or go to the Bay Area because I love the mountains. So I moved to Central California and I clerked for a judge for a year and then went into private practice and immediately became a trial lawyer. I tried my first jury trial 2 months after joining the firm and took off from there. I did that for 22 years. But what happened was that in my mid 30s, I took up the martial arts, and I was really bad at it.
Oh, okay.
But I'm one of those people that I start off really horrible at something, and then all of a sudden it clicks and I get it. And so I earned my second degree black belt right around my 40th birthday. And my teacher at that time said, he basically fired me. He said, "I'm not teaching you anymore until you master Tai Chi." And which was a death sentence because you never master Tai Chi. So I started studying Tai Chi. And Tai Chi has two really interesting paradoxes. The first is the softer you are, the stronger you are. And the second is the more vulnerable you are, the more powerful you are. Soft to be strong, vulnerable to be powerful. Well, that did not compute, especially
Yeah, I don't get the soft part. You're gonna have to go expand on that.
The thing about Tai Chi is that you learn how it's a very deadly. If you study it as a martial art, which I did, not as a flowing exercise that people see on, floating around in the park, although there's that too. It is an extremely deadly martial art, and what you learn in Tai Chi is to use the energy of your opponent against your opponent, and Aikido and Jiu-Jitsu, a lot of these other arts that are like that, all come from Tai Chi. So you can only be effective as a Tai Chi master when you're soft and vulnerable. If you tighten up and you try to be hard, then you're going to get your ass kicked every single time by a Tai Chi master. And I learned that. So one day I was in the late 90s, I was trying a case, cross-examining somebody in a courtroom, and the thought came to me, what the heck am I doing in here? And after that trial, I had a vacation planned, went on a long river trip with a bunch of friends, and spent 10 days thinking about how many people I'd really served as a trial lawyer, and ultimately concluded not many, and decided I'm going to do something different. No idea what I was going to do. But turns out the universe provides. After that trip, that Monday after the trip, I was driving out of the mountains into town to my office, and I heard a public service announcement for a new master's degree program in peacemaking and conflict studies being offered at Fresno Pacific University. And I enrolled and ultimately earned my master's degree. And that program completely changed my life. I learned so much, and it filled in so many things problems that I had with the legal system and how it worked and why it was the way and why people hate lawyers. And I finally got it. And so I couldn't come to agreement with my partners over which direction my practice would take. So I in late October of 2000, I gave 1 week's notice and walked out, leaving $10 million on the table, and started my own peacemaking mediation practice. And that's how I did. I just fearless. I just walked out and said, nope, I'm not doing this anymore. And I didn't care about the money. I cared more about myself and my soul and what was important to me. And then things I'm 50 years old, don't have a job, living in a big house, You
own a business, you just haven't created income yet, right?
That's right. Marriage isn't working so well, pretty classic stuff.
Yeah.
But eventually the boat righted itself. And, I've had some amazing experiences since then. I mean, really amazing experiences.
So 2 things I want to ask you. So when you did your first trial, and then I'm sure you did many, many more over the 22 years, did it just feel like you could do it from a skill set, but it didn't resonate with you? You didn't like what you were doing? Like what was it just icky or?
I love doing trials.
Okay.
I loved it, but I hated everything else. I hated fighting with my partners over money. I hated fighting with judges who were not very intelligent, in my opinion.
Okay.
Not who just, they were lazy. They didn't want to do the work. And not all, but some, enough. And I was tired of fighting with opposing counsel. You fight over everything. The civility in those days, the civility was starting to go. You could no longer reach agreements, and you couldn't trust people. I got tired of fighting my clients over fees. I wrote off so much money in fees. I'd try a case for a client, we'd win, and I, send an invoice to the client. And the client, why should I pay you for something that the court said I already had, or the jury said I had a right to? I was just insane. So I just got tired of it all. And inside, there was always a light that was pushing me somewhere else. So I was living this disintegrated life. On the outside, very successful trial lawyer, living in the big house, the big car, the big dream that everybody thinks about. And I was living that. And on the inside, there was something that was pushing me to serve and be of value to humanity, not be in a bigger way than just being a trial lawyer.
So I want to dive into the stuff I read in the book, Doug, but before we get there, just hopefully a short answer. But I'm curious, when you were driving, I think you said you were driving in the car and you heard that commercial for that course. So as a marketer, I'm like, did it just resonate with you? Did you think of the name of the course? I forget exactly what you said, but it said, that's what I'm looking for. I mean, was it like cosmic, or did it just...
No, it was just caught my ear. It was an NPR PSA, right? Our local NPR radio station. And it was just a PSA. In fact, I think it was one of the few that the radio station broadcast. And it was a well done spot. Caught my attention, and now obviously I was ready for it. And years before, if I heard that PSA, I would have just blown it off. But now I was ready. And I heard it and it resonated, and I got curious enough to follow through and find out what it was all about.
Okay. In your book, De-Escalate, I believe that's where I read this. You say that we're 98% emotional and only 2% rational.
Yes.
Explain that if you would.
We have been living under a myth for over 4,000 years, where we've been taught by philosophers and theologians that what separates humans from other species is rationality. It turns out science says no. We're not rational, we're emotional. I teach it. You mentioned I teach a graduate course in decision making, and one of the first things that I have my students do is try to come up with a definition of rationality. And it turns out there's no definition out there. You can't. There is just no good definition of rationality. And so, and the neuroscience is saying that we are emotional beings, not rational beings. In fact, we can't even be rational unless we're emotional first, because it's our emotions that make us pay attention to our environment. How would we know to apply reasoning to a problem, or critical thinking, or quantitative analysis to a problem, unless we had an emotional response to the environment that told us that we have to use these tools to solve the problem?
Interesting. So we titled this, and I think I grabbed it from your book. Can you really de-escalate an angry person in 90 seconds or less? And how did you figure that out?
Absolutely. You can, because it's the way our brains are hardwired. And the way I figured it out was in a very difficult mediation in 2005. And without going into all the gory details, the thought came to me, listen to the emotions. So I had the parties, rather than try to listen to the words, I said, ignore the words. Just tell us what the other side's feeling. And in 3 or 4 hours, we went from people who would rather shoot each other with AK-47s to getting up. It was a divorced couple getting up, holding hands and walking out and having lunch with each other and dismissing the lawsuit.
Wow.
And the secret was getting them to listen to the emotions. So I knew I had done something. I knew what I'd done, but I didn't know why. And then 2 years later, Matthew Lieberman's lab at UCLA, his neuroscience lab, came out with the brain scanning study that showed what happens when you label it's called affect labeling. And when you label somebody's emotions, 2 things happen in the brain automatically, unconsciously. One, the emotional centers of the brain, primarily in the amygdala or amygdalae, are inhibited. At the same time, the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, which is our executive function, comes back online. It's activated. So when people are highly emotional, they've got the emotional centers of the brain are overwhelming their prefrontal cortex. They can't think anymore. All they're doing is reacting. When we affect label, it's as if we are lending our prefrontal cortex to this very upset person for the 90 seconds it takes for them to get their prefrontal cortex back online and get control again. And it works every single time on any human brain on the planet. It doesn't matter what the culture is, because that's the way our brains are hardwired. And we acid tested this. My colleague and I, Laurel Coffer, started the Prison of Peace Project, which you probably read about in the book.
I did.
We've acid tested this for the last 13 years in maximum security prisons, training murderers to be peacemakers. And the first thing we do is teach them this skill. And it's transformative, what happens.
So I do want to ask you about the Prison of Peace. And I guess that's really the tie-in to what's called affect labeling. Affect
labeling.
Okay. I know I'm struggling, so a couple of my listeners or viewers are probably, when Jim asked him to go deeper on that. So go a little deeper, because I hear the words, but I don't know what you're talking about.
So all right, I'll try to keep this as tight as I possibly can.
Okay.
Recognizing this is a graduate course.
Right.
So we are born, as human beings, we're born with affect. We're born, and depending upon who you talk to, how many affect there are. But I follow the model developed by psychologist Sylvan Tompkins, a 1960 psychologist, who identified 9 basic affective states that humans are born with. And by affective state, they can be easily confused with emotion, but they are feelings of pleasantness or unpleasantness that we experience throughout our days. We're born with these. Babies are born with affect. We don't start constructing emotions, and this is based on the work of Lisa Feldman Barrett, neuroscientist at Northeastern University. We don't start constructing emotions until about 18 months of age. And it's kind of the developmental process, if it unfolds correctly, is that we, as toddlers and then little children, we start to associate affective experiences and all these different kind of affective experiences we have with a vocabulary that allows us to identify what that affective experience is. And then we call that an emotion. All right. So, but the problem is that because of the myth of rationality and our educational system and the fact that many families are emotionally dysfunctional, children are stunted in their emotional growth at about 6 to 8 years old. And most adults come out as physically mature, but emotionally with the maturity of a 6 or 7-year-old. And so when things get stressful and they get upset, they revert back to where they were at 6 years old. So when we affect label, or we label the emotions, what we're really helping that brain to do, that upset brain, is to figure out what's going on and then immediately take control of it. As long as when the prefrontal cortex is overwhelmed by the emotional centers of the brain, you're totally reactive and dependent upon your old childhood programming, and you have no control over it. It's completely unconscious. So, and we've all seen this. We know this intuitively. We've seen it many times. When you tell somebody what they're feeling, it gives their thinking center of the brain a chance to get back online and take over control as it calms down the emotional centers of the brain. And it happens automatically and unconsciously. And it's a biophysiological reaction that we can't control. So if I affect label, you can be as mad as you want to be. I affect labeling, you can't help yourself. You're going to control. You're going to calm down.
Wow.
And that's the power of this.
Yeah, that's master level stuff for sure. So and then I remember on a previous interview where you were talking about the Prison of Peace project, and Prison of Peace. Those words just don't normally go together. And I said, I got to get you to share that to my audience there. So talk about that if you would, Doug.
Briefly, in 2009, my colleague Laurel Coffer, a mediator and fellow adjunct professor at Pepperdine, received a letter from a woman serving a life sentence at the largest, most violent women's prison in the world, which was Valley State Prison for Women in Chowchilla, California, not too far from where I live. And Laurel read the letter, pulled out her phone, called me at her mailbox and read it to me and said, what do you think? I said, I think we should do this. So we finally got the approvals, and in April of 2010 started with 15 women, all of them long-termers or lifers, training them how to be peacemakers and mediators to stop prison violence. And we wrote this whole curriculum. We're both very experienced teachers and trainers and coaches, and we wrote this curriculum very differently than the traditional curriculum because we understood that going into a prison, most of the incarcerated people that we would be teaching had no skills whatsoever, which is probably why they were in prison.
Okay.
So we didn't know what was going to happen. We were doing this. It was all pro bono for the first 7 years. We didn't get paid a dime, and it turned out to be an incredible project. After we finished the first cohort of 15, we had a waiting list in a prison population of 3,600 women. We had a waiting list of 800 women wanting the training within 3 weeks of starting the program. The word got out really fast. This is really amazing. And so we started with the women's prison. Then 3 years later, after we had established it there, the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation in California repurposed it to a men's prison. And we went in and did the same thing with the men and got exactly the same results. And then finally, the department recognized what we were doing, and they started funding us so that before the pandemic, we were working in 15 California prisons. We had a colleague doing 14 prisons in Greece. We had a prison going in Connecticut from a grant we got to do Connecticut. We had inquiries from all over the world. We had people in Italy and people in Nairobi. I mean, people all over ready to go. And of course, then the pandemic hit, shut everything down. We pivoted and spent 2020 filming our entire curriculum. So it's all now digitized. It's digital. And we have 30 hours of training that's delivered over a year that now can be available to any prison in the world or post prison reentry programs, domestic violence centers, wherever people need to learn how to reduce violence in their communities. You can take it and teach it. It's just remarkable how powerful it is.
I'm so fascinated with this, and I'm always interested. So I'm fascinated, but I'm also a very curious person. So I'm like, what was the spark for this? If you know it, was it guards? Was it wardens? Was it prisoners who were seeking? I mean, prisoners, that's got to be pretty scary. So if they could learn to diffuse a situation, but how do they even know to ask for this?
Well, this is the interesting story.
Okay.
The woman that wrote the letter, Susan Russo, had serious surgery, lung surgery. So she was sitting in a prison hospital bed recovering, and some staff member had gotten her a list of 50 mediation trainers in California. And she had handwritten letters to 49 of them, got no response. The 50th letter ended up in Laurel's mailbox, and we responded. And the reason the women, there were about 100, there was this networking group of about 150 women serving life sentences at Valley State Prison for Women. And they knew they weren't getting out anytime soon, although many of them have now been released. And they were tired of the violence. The guards weren't doing their job. In those days, they were not there. It's gotten a lot better now, but
they just looked the other way.
Yeah, or they'd instigate violence.
Okay.
And they were tired of it. And so they thought, well, maybe if we learn how to mediate, we can stop the violence. So that was their motivation. They called us in. We answered the call, and it took off from there.
That's awesome. I mean, my hat's off to you. Anybody that does, service like that, to go into there to a prison. I mean, you're really affecting lives in a big way. It probably ways that you don't even comprehend yet. I mean, you seem like a pretty smart guy, but
yeah,
I think
you're right. The waves that have been created from this program are pretty amazing. I mean, in California, of the about 6,000 of our inmates, our students have been released on parole. We don't have any reports of recidivism. We haven't heard of, and we keep track, and we haven't heard of any students of ours who have reoffended. And everybody's doing great. Once they get out, they do great. I mean, because we're teaching foundational life skills they've never had before.
Yeah. And once somebody, and I'm talking in the correctional system, once somebody sees the correlation between the course and then when they get out, no coming back, whatever.
No recidivism, right.
Yeah, thank you.
Recidivism. That's a big word.
Pretty bad. I know. And it's late for me. That's got to be huge. So, I mean, again, my hat's off to you. I applaud that. Back to the book a little bit. I was also reading something about listening others into existence, yes. Right? Talk about that if you would.
We this is sad, but many people never, after 6 years old, never experience emotional safety, and they are never really heard or listened to after, not even before 6 years old. And so one of the needs that we have as human beings is to be deeply heard, deeply validated, and feel like we are emotionally safe. When you engage in this process of affect labeling that we've been talking about, you do all of that. You create immediate emotional safety. The speaker, even if not upset, feels deeply validated and deeply heard, and feels like I've been listening. You get me. You see me. I feel like you've listened to me into existence. I picked up that phrase when I was doing training in a middle school, teaching teachers how to do this stuff. And we were doing a peace circle, and one of the participants was a high-level administrator. And when we debriefed the peace circle, I said, well, what was your experience with it? She said, well, all my life, and professional life as well, I've been ignored. I've been invisible. Nobody ever pays any attention to me. This is the first time in my life I feel like I've been heard. I've been listened into existence. And here's a woman, 40 years old, professional. And she's not alone. That's the experience that many people have. And so that's where it came from. And I learned that the skills not only de-escalate people, they help people listen. You're listening into existence, so you feel like you're validated as a human being, which is huge. And the third thing that happens is you, the listener, are building your own emotional intelligence as you do this. You grow your emotional intelligence extremely rapidly as you practice this skill. So it's just, and it's priceless, and it costs nothing to do it. Nothing. Yeah. It's a free gift you give.
I know my parents, probably my grandparents, everybody's probably heard, why do you think God gave you one mouth and two ears, right? And intuitively, it makes sense. But I don't know if this is purely unscientific, but it seems more people are interested. I think social media doesn't help at all. That more just yak. I need to get all my stuff out, tell my opinions, and not enough people are listening.
Well, that's right, because we all we learn as children is conversation. Mm-hmm. So while you're talking, I'm thinking about what am I going to tell you? And I'm not listening to what you're saying. I'm spending most of my mental capacity thinking about what I'm going to say back to you. And I'm only waiting until you pause when I can take my turn to do my utterance. And that's the give and take of conversation. And that's okay. But we never really learn that listening occurs at three levels. We have to listen to the words, we have to listen for intended meaning, and we have to listen to emotions. And you have to be taught how to do that. And we're not taught how to do that. up until the time I came on the scene and started teaching people how to do this.
Yeah. So another thing I had listed to ask you are, what are some of the attributes of an emotionally competent person, and what does that mean in the first place?
So emotional competency consists of 3 skills. Emotional self-awareness. So at any time I can tell you what I'm feeling emotionally with a fairly rich vocabulary. Not, there was a great study that 7,000 people were asked, what are you feeling? And the 3 answers were happy, sad, and pissed off. Not very emotionally aware.
Yeah.
So the idea is to have a rich emotional vocabulary that allows you to name your emotional experience in the moment with some granularity. That's emotional awareness. When you develop that emotional self-awareness, you can then develop the second skill, which is called emotional self-regulation, the ability to choose your behaviors regardless of whatever your emotional experience is. When we self-regulate, we don't suppress or repress emotions. What we have to learn how to do is, when I'm really angry, I've got to bring in skills that help me work with my anger. Maybe I affect label myself. Maybe I leave, I exit. But what I don't do is get reactive and go back to old childhood programming, which doesn't serve. And then the third step, the third skill of emotional competency, is learning cognitive and affective empathy. And when you affect label somebody in the way that I've been describing, you're learning cognitive empathy. And what I teach, which is so different from everybody else, is I say, forget emotional self-awareness, forget emotional self-regulation. You don't need to go into therapy for 30 years to learn that stuff. All you have to do is learn how to listen to and reflect the emotions of another person. You practice this for 6 to 8 weeks in the way that I teach people to practice it, and your emotional competency will go through the roof. And it's simply learning how to pay attention to our emotional states, which we're not taught how to do.
Yes. We're down to about 2 or 3 minutes. Why isn't emotional competency taught? I mean, a lot of things are not taught to us, as we're finding out. But
3 reasons, fundamentally. Okay. Number 1, myth of rationality. Emotions in our society are weak. They make you vulnerable. They make you you can be exploited. You've got to be tough, rugged individualist. You know, it's a horrible world out there. So you can't show any emotion. You can't be emotional. That's a social and cultural bias against emotion. Totally wrong, totally abusive, causes addiction and all kinds of other problems. That's number 1. Number 2, our educational system, based on the myth of rationality, only teaches the task-focused systems in the brain. It does not teach any skills in the social system of our brain, which is more important than our task system. And number 3, because of all of that, we have families that are emotionally dysfunctional. And so parents have, since they are not emotionally competent, they don't have the ability to model and teach emotional competency to their children because they've never seen it themselves, never learned it. You take the combination of cultural, educational, and family, you know, it's a wonder that we even get along as well as we do.
Yeah. So Doug, probably my last question here is, after you've disarmed somebody or made them less angry, after you've restored the calm, then what? Like, what should be your, what do you do next?
This is the work of the peacemaker. It depends. It really depends. I find that 90% of the time, 95% of the time, once you get somebody calmed down, the problem solves itself. That person just needed to be validated. They need to be heard. They needed to be de-escalated, and the problem solves itself. For the rest of the problems, then you've got a whole range of problem-solving skills that you can engage in, from helping people work through their problem, what we call results-based listening, to negotiation, to mediation. I mean, there's just a million different skills you can use in problem solving to help people solve the problem. And you can increment the intensity of that process depending upon how serious the problem is. When you call me in, it's pretty serious because you're going to pay a lot of money, and it's a pretty serious problem involving a lot of money and involving deep relationships that need help. And so I'm at the far end of the continuum when you call somebody like me in.
Well, I for one, I'm glad you heard that NPR message and have gone this direction. I mean, I think there's enough trial lawyers. No offense that you're not missed. There's people carrying on in your absence, but the work you're doing is tremendous.
Thanks. I mean, yeah, we do need more people like me. No doubt about that.
So I tried to cover as much as I could in the half hour, but I'm sure people want to connect with you. And where do they get your book? So feel free to tell them where to get your books and where to connect with you.
Probably the easiest way to do this. Did I gave you a link for when we did the podcast? Do you have that around?
No, not in front of me.
Okay. All right. Very simple. DougNoll.com is my website. You'll find all my resources there. And you can email me at doug@dougnoll.com. I'm a sole practitioner. I answer my own emails. I don't have an entourage. I don't have a virtual assistants. I'm just me. So I answer everything, and I'm happy to take questions and provide information about what I do and how I teach and train and coach and that sort of thing to anybody who's interested.
Well, that's awesome. You've been very generous with your time. This is like the second time in a month that we've connected, and I know that some of my loyal listeners here, Jeff and Phil, and I don't know if you can see the comments. Phil says,
"Yeah, I'm seeing the comments come. Encore, please."
Yeah. Oh, real quick. I think Jeff Herring asked the question. I don't know. Jean-Luc Ponty.
Jean-Luc Ponty. Of course, I am. Yeah.
Is that a musician or?
No, he's a jazz violinist. Actually, he's not a jazz violinist.
Okay.
He would not call himself a jazz violinist. He would call himself a world musician, which I think is probably accurate. But he's an amazing violinist from France, of course, followed in the footsteps of Stefan Grappelli and people like that. And yeah, he's an amazing musician.
Well, very good. Well, I'm sure you can't hear it, but you're getting a standing ovation right now. So, Doug, thank you so much. I greatly appreciate your time today. Hey, folks, that wraps up this very special interview with my guest, Doug Noll. I highly recommend you connect with him, follow him, learn from him, support him if you can, especially with the prison work. I think that's hugely valuable. You can connect with me at getjimpalmer.com if you're interested in joining me and about right now 28 other smart entrepreneurs in the Dream Biz Mastermind. That is dreambizcoaching.com. And don't forget, you can get free digital copies of all of my books, now conveniently located over my shoulders, not on my boat, but at Barnes & Noble, Amazon as Kindle, and the iBookstore. But that's it. Until this time next week, another fantastic interview. I am Captain Jim Palmer, the Dream Business Coach. You take good care.